Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The morning sun streamed through the large classroom windows, casting timid rays onto the polished wooden desks. Yet the atmosphere inside was far from bright. Mr. Harrison, a literature professor for over 20 years, moved slowly between the rows, a mixture of arrogance and weariness etched on his face. His gray eyes scrutinized each student, and his stern expression seemed to say that no one would escape his judgment today. 14-year-old Marcus Johnson entered the room carrying his slightly worn black schoolbag. His steps were hesitant, but he held his head high. His attentive, curious brown eyes searched for a place to sit. He knew some teachers looked at him differently because of his skin color, but he had learned to ignore the whispers and focus on his dreams. The classroom was silent, but not with a reassuring silence. It was a heavy silence, filled with anticipation and tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mr. Harrison stopped in front of the blackboard and tapped his chalk lightly against the wood. His gaze fixed on Marcus, like a hawk ready to swoop down on its prey. "Marcus," he said in a cold, almost sarcastic voice, "can you explain what you wrote for your poetry assignment?" Marcus felt his heart race. The room seemed to shrink around him. His classmates stared at him, some with pity, others with curiosity. He took a deep breath, holding his notebook to his chest like a shield. He had no idea that this moment would mark the beginning of a life lesson he would never forget. Mr. Harrison, unaware of who stood before him, was ready to humiliate this boy in front of the entire class. What he didn't know was that behind that young face lay a powerful connection. Marcus's father, William Johnson, was an influential lawyer, respected and feared for his tenacity and integrity. But for now, Marcus was just a vulnerable teenager facing the gratuitous cruelty of a man blinded by his prejudices. The silence grew heavier. Every breath in the class seemed amplified. Marcus stood up slowly, ready to face the judgment, unaware of the storm he was about to unleash. The chalk squeaked on the blackboard as Mr. Harrison turned to Marcus with a smile that was anything but benevolent. "Marcus," he said condescendingly, "you wrote this poem for homework, didn't you? Let me guess, you really think this is acceptable?" Marcus felt his cheeks flush. He clenched his fists on his notebook, trying to keep his voice calm. I tried to stay on topic, sir." A dry laugh escaped Mr. Harrison, making Marcus jump. "Follow the theme," he repeated. "It's not about the theme, Marcus. It's about talent. And, frankly, I wonder how your parents could have let you write something so mediocre." Whispers rippled through the classroom. Some students looked away, uncomfortable. Others exchanged furtive glances, aware that Marcus was being humiliated in front of everyone. Marcus felt his hands tremble. He wanted to reply, but each word seemed stuck in his throat. "Sir, he began hesitantly. But Mr. Harrison raised his hand to interrupt him. "No, Marcus. You don't talk to me like that. Maybe you should think about what you're doing with your life before you speak to me." Marcus's heart was pounding. Tears threatened to well up, but he took a deep breath and tried to control himself. He looked around. His classmates had grim faces, some sheepish, others shocked by the teacher's cruelty. As Mr. Harrison continued to criticize, completely unaware of who Marcus was, the boy realized he had to find the strength within himself to react. He didn't yet know how, but he knew this humiliation wouldn't go unpunished. At that precise moment, the entire classroom transformed into a theater of silent tension. Every student held their breath, waiting for Marcus's reaction. Deep down, he sensed that this moment would change something, that the truth would finally come out. The classroom was still silent, but now that silence was charged with electricity. Marcus clutched his notebook to his chest and felt anger rising within him. He had been humiliated, ridiculed, and despite his young age, he knew he couldn't let this go. Mr. Harrison, pleased with the effect he'd had, continued walking down the classroom. "Seriously, Marcus, sometimes I wonder how your parents..." He trailed off, searching for the perfect insult. He had no idea that what he was saying was a monumental mistake. Marcus took a deep breath and stood up slowly. All eyes turned towards him. Even the students who usually avoided confrontation seemed frozen. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly but firm, "before you say anything about my family, I think you should know, my father is not someone to be mocked." The professor frowned in surprise. "Oh really? And who would your father be, Marcus?" he asked with a mixture of sarcasm and curiosity. Marcus raised his head and, with renewed determination, declared, "My father is William Johnson." A murmur rippled through the classroom. The students looked at each other, some letting out stifled exclamations. Mr. Harrison, for his part, paled almost instantly. The name William Johnson was not unfamiliar. He was an influential lawyer, respected for his rigor and tenacity, capable of shaking entire institutions to their core. "William Johnson?" the professor stammered, his voice losing all confidence. You're serious?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. And I think you should think before you judge someone, especially in front of their entire class." Mr. Harrison's face fell. Suddenly, his arrogance vanished, replaced by a sudden and tangible fear. He had just realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had humiliated a boy without knowing his family, and he had just attacked one of the most powerful men in the city. For the first time, the silence in the classroom became heavy with meaning. Every student understood that something had just changed. Marcus, despite his young age, had reversed the dynamic. The bully was now the one caught off guard. The silence in the classroom had become almost palpable. The students' eyes followed Marcus and Mr. Harrison's every move, as if time had stopped. The teacher, usually the master of the room, suddenly seemed tiny in the face of the truth he had just heard. "William Johnson," he repeated, his voice trembling, almost incredulous. You're really his son?" Marcus nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. And I believe what you just did was not only unfair, but utterly disrespectful." A murmur rippled through the classroom. The other students, long silent witnesses to Marcus's humiliation, now sensed a reversal of fortune. Some smiled discreetly, others exchanged admiring glances. Mr. Harrison tried to regain his composure. "Listen. I didn't mean to." He stammered, but his voice lacked strength. He understood that his apologies, however sincere, could not erase the humiliation he had just caused. Marcus took a deep breath, summoning his courage. "Mr. Harrison, I don't mean to humiliate you. But I want you to understand this, no matter who you think you have in front of you, every student deserves respect. No prejudice, no arrogance, can justify what you just did." The professor's face tightened. He was humiliated not only in front of his student, but in front of the entire class. The walls of the room, witnesses to so many lessons, seemed to resonate with the weight of this confrontation. I understand," he finally said, his voice weak. I'll think about what you just said." Marcus sat down quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. He had done what few students dared to do, stand up against injustice, facing someone powerful in his position. But that was only the beginning. The true consequence of this humiliation, the one that would affect Mr. Harrison far beyond the classroom, was yet to come. William Johnson, Marcus's father, was not going to remain silent when he learned what had happened. A few days later, the tension in the town had not subsided. William Johnson had learned from Marcus what had happened in the classroom. Calm but determined, he made an appointment with the school principal. The headmaster's office was large and austere, but William Johnson immediately commanded attention. His penetrating gaze and self-assurance left no room for doubt. The headmaster, a normally self-assured man, suddenly felt uneasy. "I'm here about my son, Marcus," William began, his voice firm but controlled. "He was publicly humiliated by Mr. Harrison, your literature teacher. I want to understand why a student can be subjected to this kind of treatment at your school." The headmaster stammered a few words, trying to find excuses, but William Johnson wasn't distracted. He explained in detail what had happened, the racist remarks, the humiliation in front of the whole class, and the emotional impact on Marcus. Action was taken quickly. Mr. Harrison was summoned to a disciplinary meeting. The professor, who had thought the situation would blow over as a minor incident, was confronted with the seriousness of his behavior. Marcus's lawyer had carefully chosen his words, and the administration understood that the matter could not be ignored. Mr. Harrison received a formal warning, along with mandatory training on diversity, sensitivity, and the prevention of discrimination. His once solid reputation was now tarnished by this public humiliation. The class, and indeed the entire school, had learned a valuable lesson about respect and the limits of authority. Marcus, for his part, felt a mixture of pride and relief. His father had stood up for him, but he had also learned an even more important lesson: strength does not lie in fear or cruelty, but in courage and justice. The following week, Marcus's class seemed different. The atmosphere was lighter, but the lessons learned this time weren't just literary. The students spoke to each other respectfully, some whispering apologies to Marcus for not having supported him sooner. Marcus, for his part, had changed. The experience had made him stronger and more confident. He now knew that standing up for the truth, even in the face of authority figures, could reverse the most unjust situations. Mr. Harrison, for his part, had received his training and was clumsily trying to regain some respect. But Marcus had noticed that the professor was now avoiding condescending or discriminatory remarks. The professor's pride had been wounded and his prejudices confronted, and for the first time, he was reflecting on his actions. One day, at the end of class, Marcus remained seated for a moment after the others had left. He picked up his notebook, looked out the window, and thought about his father. William Johnson had not only defended his dignity but had also shown him the importance of integrity and courage. Marcus smiled inwardly, aware that this humiliation had been an ordeal that had transformed him. He was no longer afraid to stand up against injustice, and he knew that a single moment of courage could change the course of things. This experience was not only a lesson for Mr. Harrison or the class, but for Marcus himself. Dignity and truth are more powerful than any insult or prejudice. And sometimes, respect is earned not by force, but by the courage to remain true to oneself. School life resumed its course, but Marcus knew he would never be the same again. He had discovered his own strength, and that day he had gained something that no one could take away from him: confidence in his worth and in his voice.